The betrayal that started it all did not arrive loudly or with obvious warning. It came wrapped in confidence, dressed in certainty, and delivered by the one person who should have understood loyalty better than anyone else, my own sister. When Linda stood in my kitchen that day, her posture rigid with self-assurance, I could feel something shifting beneath the surface. Even before she spoke, there was a sharpness in her eyes, a certainty that she had already won a game I hadn't realized we were playing. The kitchen, once a place of family meals and quiet conversations, suddenly felt like a negotiation room where trust was about to be traded for advantage. Her words were carefully chosen, but the intent behind them was blunt. She spoke as if decisions had already been made, as if my role had been reduced to nothing more than a formality. The company our father had built with decades of sacrifice was no longer presented as a shared responsibility or a legacy to protect. Instead, it was framed as an asset to be liquidated quickly, a prize to be claimed before anyone could question the move. As she talked, I recognized the familiar tone she had used for years, whenever money or control entered the conversation: dismissive, superior, and unyielding. What made the moment sting wasn't just the sale itself, but the assumption behind it. Linda believed I was incapable of understanding the weight of what was happening. She spoke to me as if I were an obstacle rather than a partner, a delay rather than a safeguard. Her fiancé sat beside her, reinforcing the narrative with polished explanations and numbers meant to impress. But never once did either of them ask what I thought. That omission was the clearest sign of betrayal. Decisions about our family's future had been made without respect, without transparency, and without regard for the work that had quietly protected the company for years. As she pushed the papers toward me, her confidence bordered on arrogance. She spoke of profits, of freedom, of luxury trips already planned, all while implying that I should be grateful she had taken the burden of responsibility off my hands. In that moment, I realized she saw the company not as our father's life's work, but as a shortcut to personal gain. The betrayal was not only financial, it was moral. She had chosen ambition over integrity, speed over stewardship, and control over family. Signing those papers did not feel like surrender. It felt like confirmation. Confirmation that the distance between us was no longer emotional but fundamental. She mistook my calm for ignorance, my silence for weakness. She believed victory belonged to whoever spoke the loudest and moved the fastest. What she didn't understand was that real control often exists where no one is looking, built patiently over time, protected by restraint rather than bravado. When she finally delivered the insult, calling me an idiot for what she believed I had just accepted, it revealed everything. The betrayal was complete in that single word. It showed how little regard she had for me, how convinced she was that she alone had outsmarted everyone else. Her confidence depended entirely on my supposed failure. She needed me to be wrong so she could feel powerful. As she walked out, already celebrating a future funded by money she believed was hers, I stood alone in the quiet house, fully aware that the line had been crossed. That moment marked the end of any illusion of shared values. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years of underestimated resolve and misplaced trust. What Linda saw as a triumph was merely the beginning of consequences she never anticipated. And while she believed she had taken everything that mattered, the truth was far more complicated and far less forgiving. The deal was signed without arguments, without raised voices, and without a single attempt to stop what was unfolding. That silence, however, carried more weight than any protest ever could. As the papers lay spread across the kitchen table, the room felt suspended in time, as if every sound had been muted to make space for the decision about to be made. Linda watched closely, her confidence sharpening with each passing second, clearly expecting resistance or hesitation. When none came, it only reinforced her belief that she was in full control. I took the pen slowly, not out of uncertainty, but out of awareness. Every signature line represented more than a legal transfer. It marked the moment when assumption collided with preparation. Linda interpreted my calm as ignorance, mistaking composure for defeat. She believed that by acting quickly and decisively, She had outmaneuvered everyone else involved. Her certainty left no room for doubt. And in her mind, the absence of questions from me confirmed her victory. She never considered that silence could be deliberate. The language of the documents was polished and formal, filled with assurances of value and opportunity. The sale price was highlighted repeatedly, emphasized as proof of brilliance rather than risk. Raymond pointed to projected gains and immediate liquidity, presenting numbers as if they were guarantees rather than estimates. They spoke in absolutes, confident the future had already been secured. What they failed to understand was that the documents they valued most only reflected what was visible, not what truly mattered. As I signed, memory drifted back to the early days of the company, long before polished contracts and valuation summaries. I remembered watching my father pour energy into every relationship, every route, every handshake that built trust mile by mile. That foundation had never been about speed or shortcuts. It was about stability, reputation, and careful planning. Those values were absent from the deal in front of me, replaced by urgency and self-interest. The contrast was striking, yet I remained outwardly neutral. Linda's expression shifted briefly when she realized how easily I complied. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by satisfaction. She gathered the papers with efficiency, already treating the matter as settled. There was no discussion about long-term responsibility, no acknowledgement of potential fallout. The deal existed only as a means to an end, not as a decision with lasting consequences. That was the true silence, not the lack of words, but the absence of accountability. When they stood to leave, their excitement was palpable. Plans for celebrations and luxury filled the space where caution should have lived. The confidence with which they spoke about future spending revealed how final they believed the transaction to be. In their eyes, the company was already behind them, transformed into numbers ready to be enjoyed. They exited the house convinced they had secured freedom, unaware they had also inherited obligations they never fully understood. After the door closed, the silence deepened. It no longer belonged to the moment, but to the aftermath. That quiet was not empty. It was deliberate, structured, and reinforced by years of preparation that had unfolded beyond their awareness. The deal, though signed openly, was only complete on the surface. Beneath it lay protections carefully put in place long before this day arrived. Signing in silence was never an act of surrender. It was a choice rooted in foresight rather than emotion. Words would have changed nothing, and confrontation would have revealed too much. Silence preserved balance, allowed assumptions to stand unchallenged, and let confidence run unchecked. In that quiet moment, the deal reached its conclusion on paper, but its true outcome had already been decided long before the pen ever touched the page. The illusion of victory settled over Linda quickly, wrapping itself around her confidence like armor she believed could not be pierced. From the moment the papers were signed, she carried herself as though the outcome had been permanently secured, as if a single transaction had rewritten reality in her favor. Her tone shifted from assertive to triumphant, and every word she spoke afterward carried the certainty of someone who believed the future now belonged to her. She mistook completion for success, assuming that, because the deal was done, the consequences were finished as well. Her celebration began almost immediately, not with reflection or caution, but with indulgence. She spoke openly about luxury, about rewards she felt entitled to after what she framed as a bold and decisive move. In her mind, victory meant speed, visibility, and spending. The company was no longer a responsibility or a legacy. It had become a converted asset, a symbol of her cleverness and authority. She believed she had outsmarted everyone involved, especially me, and that belief fed her confidence more than the money itself ever could. What made the illusion so powerful was how convincing it appeared on the surface. Numbers looked impressive, contracts appeared final, and the absence of immediate resistance reinforced her sense of dominance. She saw silence as surrender and calm as incompetence. Each unchecked assumption strengthened her narrative, allowing her to move forward without hesitation. Victory, as she defined it, required no verification beyond her own certainty. Yet her understanding of control was deeply flawed. She equated ownership with access and authority with visibility. Because she could see the surface assets changing hands, she assumed everything of value had been captured. She never questioned what existed beyond the obvious, never considered that true power often lies in structures built quietly and protected deliberately. Her confidence depended entirely on what she believed she knew, and that narrow view blinded her to what mattered most. The illusion followed her everywhere, shaping her behavior and decisions. She booked trips, made plans, and spoke of the future as if it were already guaranteed. Every gesture was fueled by the assumption that risk had been eliminated. She did not prepare for setbacks because she did not believe they were possible. In her mind, victory meant the end of uncertainty, not the beginning of responsibility. That mindset left no room for caution or restraint. There was a sharp contrast between her outward triumph and the reality forming beneath it. While she celebrated visibility, unseen mechanisms were already in motion. Legal structures she never bothered to examine were doing exactly what they were designed to do. Her victory relied on appearances, while the truth operated quietly in the background, unaffected by confidence or display. The more she celebrated, the more deeply she committed to an outcome she didn't fully understand. The illusion was sustained by arrogance as much as by momentum. She dismissed any possibility that she could be wrong, because acknowledging uncertainty would have required humility. Instead, she doubled down on certainty, interpreting every delay or complication as a minor inconvenience rather than a warning. Her sense of triumph depended on denial, on the refusal to look beyond the immediate moment. Victory, real victory, is measured by durability. It survives scrutiny, adapts to challenge, and holds firm under pressure. What Linda experienced was something far more fragile. It was a momentary high built on incomplete information and misplaced confidence. The illusion felt powerful because it was loud and visible, but it lacked substance. And when reality finally asserted itself, it became clear that what she had celebrated was never victory at all, only the appearance of it, destined to collapse the moment it was tested. When the cards were declined, the illusion shattered in an instant, collapsing under the weight of reality she had never prepared to face. What was meant to be a flawless celebration became the first undeniable crack in the story Linda had convinced herself was already complete. Standing at the front desk of the resort, surrounded by polished marble and quiet luxury, she expected affirmation. The card in her hand symbolized success, access, and validation. Instead, it delivered refusal. At first, the moment felt procedural, almost insignificant. A pause, a second swipe, the soft electronic tone that never arrived. Linda's confidence remained intact for a few seconds longer as she waited, certain the delay was nothing more than a technical hiccup. Her posture stayed upright, her expression calm, because victory, in her mind, could not fail at something so basic. The environment reinforced her expectation. Everything around her suggested wealth, privilege, and entitlement. Decline did not belong in that setting. When the clerk stepped away, the space grew uncomfortable. Silence stretched too long, and subtle glances from nearby guests began to register. Linda leaned forward, her tone sharpening as she demanded clarification. The refusal was no longer abstract. It had become personal. The explanation offered was simple, professional, and devastating. The account was not active. The card could not be authorized. What she believed was guaranteed no longer existed. Her reaction shifted quickly from irritation to disbelief. She reached for her phone, scrolling with increasing urgency, checking linked accounts one after another. Each rejection mirrored the last, leaving no room for doubt. The certainty she carried into the lobby evaporated with every failed attempt. What she had treated as permanent was suddenly inaccessible. The money she assumed was hers had never truly been within reach. As her voice rose, so did the attention. Confidence turned defensive, then accusatory. She insisted something was wrong, that a mistake had been made, that this situation was impossible. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that she had no explanation beyond expectation. She demanded authority where none existed. Relying on status that dissolved the moment the system refused to recognize it. The arrival of management did nothing to restore control. Calm explanations replaced indulgence, and alternatives were offered that required immediate payment she could not provide. The environment shifted subtly but decisively. What had felt exclusive moments earlier now felt procedural and impersonal. Luxury became conditional, and without authorization, there was no exception. Then the situation crossed a line she had never considered. What began as a declined card escalated into formal scrutiny. Quiet conversations took place beyond the desk. Systems flagged irregularities, and protocols activated without emotion or judgment. The institution did not care about her confidence, her intentions, or her belief in entitlement. It responded only to facts, and the facts were no longer on her side. The realization arrived slowly, settling in as panic rather than clarity. Her victory had depended on access, and access had just been denied. The power she thought she held existed only as long as it went unchallenged. The moment the card failed, so did the narrative she built around herself. No amount of insistence could restore what had already been closed. When the cards were declined, it was not just a transaction that failed. It was the collapse of assumption, the exposure of overconfidence, and the first public moment where belief met consequence. In that quiet but irreversible refusal, reality asserted itself without negotiation. What followed was inevitable, but the true turning point happened right there, at the desk, when certainty was replaced by undeniable proof that the victory she claimed was never real to begin with. Boundaries were drawn not in anger or revenge, but in clarity. They formed quietly, deliberately, and without apology. When the chaos reached my doorstep, in the form of desperate requests and urgent pleas, I understood that this was the moment where intention mattered more than emotion. For years, I had been expected to absorb the impact of other people's decisions, to soften consequences in the name of family. This time, I chose something different. I chose finality. When Raymond stood outside my door, his exhaustion was visible long before he spoke. His words tumbled out in fragments of explanation and urgency, each one built on the hope that I would intervene. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding, something temporary that could be undone with a call or a favor. He spoke of bail, of complications, of how easily it could all be resolved if I were willing to step in. Beneath his desperation lay the same assumption Linda had carried all along, that I would clean up the fallout, that boundaries would bend when pressure was applied. Listening without interrupting was intentional. It allowed the reality of his request to settle fully into the space between us. What he asked for was not help, but erasure. Erasure of consequences, of accountability, of the choices that had been made without consent or respect. He spoke of family unity as if it were something that could be restored through convenience rather than responsibility. His promises of apologies and change rang hollow, arriving only when control had been lost. The boundary I set was simple, but it carried weight. I refused to interfere, not because I lacked compassion, but because intervention would have meant undoing the very protections that had preserved what mattered. It would have signaled that manipulation still worked. That pressure could override principle. Drawing that line felt heavy, but it also felt necessary. For the first time, I allowed the consequences to remain where they belonged. What followed was not immediate resolution, but escalation. Legal processes moved forward without sentiment, guided by documentation rather than intention. The systems Linda had dismissed now defined her reality. Each step was procedural, unemotional, and irreversible. There were no shortcuts, no appeals to familiarity or entitlement. The consequences unfolded exactly as the boundaries demanded they would. Throughout it all, silence became a form of strength. I did not respond to calls or messages meant to reopen negotiation. Each unanswered attempt reinforced the line that had been drawn. The distance was not cruelty. It was consistency. Boundaries lose power when they are explained repeatedly or softened under pressure. By maintaining them, I allowed events to progress without interference or distortion. Facing consequences is rarely immediate or dramatic. It arrives in stages, each one more sobering than the last. For Linda, the weight accumulated slowly through legal notices, financial restrictions, and public accountability. The image she had built of herself unraveled as the systems she ignored asserted authority. What had once been dismissed as impossible became unavoidable. For me, the experience reshaped how I understood responsibility. Boundaries are not punishments. They are protections. They preserve clarity where chaos thrives and prevent history from repeating itself. Choosing not to rescue someone from their own decisions does not mean abandoning them. It means refusing to participate in the cycle that created the harm. In drawing those boundaries, I accepted the discomfort that comes with being misunderstood. I allowed others to interpret my actions as cold or unforgiving, knowing that explanation would change nothing. The consequences that followed were not something I imposed, but something I permitted to exist. And in that allowance, balance was restored, accountability took its place, and the weight of responsibility finally shifted back to where it belonged. Protecting the legacy meant more than safeguarding assets or enforcing legal boundaries. It was about preserving the vision, the values, and the work that had been poured into the company long before anyone else even understood its worth. My father's life had been defined by tireless effort, meticulous planning, and a commitment to integrity in every relationship and contract. Every decision he made was guided by a desire to create something lasting, something that could withstand both time and turbulence. As I stepped into the role of protecting that legacy, I realized that doing so required vigilance, patience, and unwavering focus. It demanded that I separate emotion from strategy, that I prioritize what truly mattered over the drama that often threatened to distract. The first step in moving forward was consolidation. Every piece of the business, every asset, and every contract had been structured in a way that insulated it from reckless or impulsive decisions. While others saw a company ripe for liquidation or quick gain, I understood that the real strength lay in the foundation that had been quietly built over decades. This invisible architecture, which I had spent years fortifying behind the scenes, now became the central tool for protecting the legacy. The surface-level operations could be disrupted, but the core, what truly represented value, was untouchable, shielded from anyone who did not understand the full picture. Running the business after the upheaval required a renewed sense of clarity and focus. I re-engaged with trusted partners, reaffirming relationships that had always been the backbone of our operations. Every conversation, every contract, every negotiation became an opportunity not just to sustain the company, but to reinforce its reputation for reliability and integrity. By demonstrating competence and consistency, I reinforced the message that the business was steady, resilient, and capable of growth even after the internal family conflicts that had threatened to destabilize it. Protecting a legacy meant proving, daily, that it could withstand challenge and continue to flourish. At the same time, moving forward required emotional discipline. The temptation to dwell on betrayal or to seek retribution was present, but I understood that doing so would compromise the stability I worked to preserve. True protection involved maintaining boundaries, ensuring that past mistakes and opportunism could not erode what had been carefully built. It was about control, not in the sense of dominance over others, but in maintaining authority over what mattered, keeping the focus on the company, the employees, and the relationships that formed the foundation of continued success. The long-term perspective was essential. I planned with foresight, balancing immediate operational decisions with strategic growth initiatives. Expansion, innovation, and new partnerships became part of a vision that extended beyond the moment of family conflict, allowing the company to thrive without distraction. Every route optimized, every contract renewed, and every client interaction reinforced stability. It was a forward-focused strategy rooted in resilience and careful stewardship, designed to honor the work of the past while ensuring opportunity for the future. Protecting the legacy also meant reclaiming peace. By drawing firm boundaries and allowing consequences to run their course. I preserved not only the company, but also my own ability to lead without interference. Moving forward was a conscious act of prioritization, valuing the work, the relationships, and the history over conflict and drama. It was an understanding that true leadership combines strength with patience, foresight with flexibility, and decisiveness with restraint. In doing so, the legacy my father built did not just survive, it continued to grow, reflecting both his vision and my commitment to honor it fully. In the end, moving forward was not simply about surviving past challenges. It was about transforming them into a platform for lasting growth. Protecting the legacy meant ensuring that what had been created with decades of hard work could continue to serve, inspire, and prosper, unshaken by betrayal, unthreatened by impatience, and untangled from the distractions of those who failed to understand its true value. It was the culmination of careful planning, resilience, and deliberate action, proof that legacies endure when they are safeguarded with wisdom, clarity, and unwavering dedication.